I want to keep your attention in Exodus chapter 20. I want you to notice something really interesting about this text, which, it gets lost in chapter 20 because of it being the chapter with the Ten Commandments in it. And so tucked away at the end here is this most interesting prohibition, especially that which is expressed in verse 25, that if you built an altar, you'd not build it of hewn stone. For if you use your tool on it, you have profaned it. Why would that be the case? What is it about hewn stones that God dislikes? It's obvious that he preferred a natural altar with natural stones, something that would have been compiled by that which he himself has created, he himself has ordained. I want you to notice that the argument for this, the authority behind it, is stated in verse 22. That you shall say to the children of Israel, you have seen that I talked with you from heaven. That's what all of these things are rooted on. You do know where these come from. It's like the question that Jesus was asked. By what authority are you doing these things? Is it from heaven or from men? Moses said, I want you to remind them that when I talked to you, I was talking from heaven. It's like if someone were to say, the White House is calling for you. This is a big deal. This is the origin from which these instructions come. So what is the benefit for us today? Why is this perpetually preserved for us to understand about the altar? We don't have any intention of building an altar, but probably we can see the application to today. That even today there is a problem of hewn stones in God's church. And we want to try to identify some of those and understand what is the appeal. What is the appeal to the desire to take up that chisel and go to work on God's stones? And I know that I'm stealing tonight's thunder a little bit when I introduce the subject this way, but there are really three reasons or appeals that there are in order to compel us to want to whittle on God's stones. By the way, just if you were to look at some examples of altars that one could have considered in those days, there's only one that would have been approved by God. I think there's one that catches the eye that is more impressive as far as man is concerned, the one at the bottom with all of its ornate carvings. That's impressive, but the one on the top right there, the one with stones that you might walk along and find on God's creation, that's what he intended. Why would you want to do anything to that? And that's what we're going to look at. First of all, the temptation to change. And tonight we're talking about the temptations of Jesus from Luke chapter 4. And you may have studied that before and seen somewhat of an outline develop in the kinds of temptations that took place. Outlined in 1 John is this dichotomy of lusts. First one being the lust of the flesh, right? So there's a lust of the flesh that pertains to our desire to improve upon God's pattern. The lust of the flesh with regard to chiseled stones, I imagine, is something like this, that we like it better, that it looks better to us. It's more appealing to the eye. And I know that there's always been some crossover, at least in my mind, between the flesh and the eye, because the eye is part of the flesh, right? So understand that, okay, I might have categorized that as lust of the eye. You know what's coming, right? But there is a special reason why I consider this as being part of the flesh. And maybe 1 Kings 12 will help you see that more clearly. But there is what the flesh likes. There is what we enjoy, what we prefer, what we consider to be more appealing. So in 1 Kings chapter 12, notice the appeal that Jeroboam shared with Israel in order to hew upon the stones of religion in his day. Verse 28, therefore the king asked advice, He made 2 calves of gold and said to the people, "It is too much for you to go up to Jerusalem." That's the flesh right there. That's Jeroboam saying, it's too hard on your flesh. This is going to be easier for you. So he presented them saying, "Here are your gods, O Israel, which brought you up from the land of Egypt." So just as Exodus 20 had said, I am speaking from heaven, and therefore any attempt at creating other gods, even out of gold or silver, is a huge step down to my glory. That I'm speaking from heaven, you can't come close to being able to honor me with your meager effort with gold and silver to glorify my name. So Jeroboam dishonors God and his religion by attempting to choose a place that God did not put his name and present altars or idols that do not glorify God. Also, verse 31, it says he made shrines of the high places and made priests from every class of people who were not of the sons of Levi. We're going to come back to this because it's going to have a bearing on future points. So recognize, first of all, that there is an appeal to what we like, what we prefer, and what is easy for us to do. Consider the lust of the eye for a moment. From 2 Kings chapter 16, verse 10, we see the appeal of one who is always on the lookout for something that in his view or in his eyes is an improvement or something that is made better. Look at, again, 2 Kings chapter 16, verse 10. King Ahaz went to Damascus to meet Tiglath-Pileser, king of Assyria, and saw an altar that was at Damascus. The King Ahaz sent to Uriah the priest the design of the altar and its pattern according to all its workmanship. And Uriah the priest built the altar according to what the king had sent him. Where are the priests? Where are the priests in these days who would stand up to the king? Where are the priests who, like in the days of Uzzah, said, no, it is not for you, Uzziah, to go into the house of the Lord. It's not for you to burn incense to the Lord. This is the kind of man who would provide for and give whatever he wanted. He was not bound by any conviction, but he will do for the king as he asked. You know what is the problem of this wandering eye, always looking out for some improvement? It's the eye of the one who enviously exclaims, everyone has hewn stones today. We can't compete if we don't have what other churches have. And who gets the glory in this arrangement? Look at verse 10 again. The design of its pattern was according to all its workmanship. Workmanship. Who gets the glory with this altar? It's the workman, right? King Ahaz saw it. It appealed to the eye, and he liked it. And who gets the praise? It's the workman and his skill, his ability, not God's glory. No one remembers that it was God who created the stone, the natural stone, out of nothingness. No, they remember the fact that men have taken these raw materials and made them into something beautiful. No attention when it came to God's altar was given to such things. That's why it was defiled. That way it was profaned for men to take up his tools and use it upon his rocks. You know, someone might say, well, I remember reading about, in Exodus 31, I remember reading about skilled, artistic craftsmen who worked on the tabernacle. Do you remember that? What about all those skillful workers? Is it really that God is unconcerned about professionalism or skill? Exodus 31, verse 1. It says, Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, See, I have called by name Bezalel and the sons of Uri, the son of Hur, the tribe of Judah. I have filled him with the Spirit of God in wisdom, understanding, knowledge, and in all manner of workmanship, to design artistic works, to work in gold and silver and bronze, in cutting jewels for setting, in carving wood, and to work in all manner of workmanship. That sounds pretty artistic. That sounds pretty creative. God is not without a little flavor. God is not without a little appreciation for the fine things in life. But what's the difference? Look at verse 11. And these men, Oholiab and Asamach, verse 6, all these men, they worked on these things, and the anointing oil and sweet incense for the holy place, according to all that I have commanded you, they shall do. Here are men filled with the Spirit of God who utilize the gifts God has given them, but they did not exceed their mandate. They did not go beyond the pattern that God had given according to Moses. So we come back to the question of who gets the credit for this? Who gets the glory? Remember that in Acts chapter 17, verse 24 and 25, it says, The God who made the world and everything in it, being Lord of heaven and earth, does not live in temples made by man, nor is he served by human hands as though he needed anything, since he himself gives to all mankind life and breath and everything. God doesn't need us. God doesn't rely on us. He doesn't need man's work in order to be worshiped. He doesn't need some image to be formed out of gold that was given by man to be praised or glorified by it. Isaiah 66, 1 and 2 says, Heaven is my throne and earth my footstool. What is the house that you would build for me? And what is the place of my rest? All these things my hand has made, and so all these things came to be, declares the Lord. But this is the one to whom I will look, him who is humble and contrite in spirit and trembles at my word. And so the problem with trying to improve upon God's plan, his pattern, trying to make it according to our image of what is better, is that we lose sight of the fact that God is, as Exodus 20 verse 22 said, God is speaking from heaven. He is the creator. You cannot improve upon his plan. All right, pride of life is last one. This is the argumentation that says, but Lord, maybe not in so many words, but we can get more people. People will appreciate our worship. We could get some proselytes to Judaism when they see your altar and they are impressed by it. So we'll get the people there, get a bigger crowd. And I would also add to that the argumentation that some would suggest that this allows us to give our best to God. What am I supposed to do as a craftsman that loves the Lord? I've got all this. I've got all these, these plans and hopes. I've got all this willingness to serve and utilize my gifts for the Lord. And so, just as we see in religion today, you got the people with passions, people who ride horses. They say, "Well, I'm going to belong to the cowboy church then." People that love motorcycles, I'm going to belong to Bikers of Christ. That's going to be my religion. Do you know that the founder of that in California created a ministry called Rushing Wind Ministries? Naturally, right? That's what you're into. That's what you like. That's how you want to serve. I'm a dancer. I want to find a church then that has a dance praise team, right? As some do. The examples go on and on. The musician finds a church with a band because that's his gift, that's his ability. It's wonderful to want to give your best to God and be able to use the gift for God. But don't forget the lesson that Saul teaches us in 1 Samuel chapter 15 about offering the best to God. That was Saul's intention when he spared some of the best of the flocks for sacrifice to God. When God had said to destroy all of the Amalekites and don't leave any, including the animals, alive, Saul feared the people, spared the best, and then tried to excuse himself by telling Samuel that he had saved the best in order to offer to God. In verse 22, Samuel explained or asked, "Has the Lord as great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as in obeying the voice of the Lord? Behold, to obey is better than sacrifice, and to heed than the fat of rams." So when it comes to offering the best, it's always best to do so, as long as we understand that the best thing that we can offer is obedience through humble submission to the will of God. Anything besides that, he says, is rebellion and sin. I want you to consider our track record. I'm thinking of the pride of life and thinking we can improve upon what God has made. We don't have a great track record as far as that's concerned. Think about synthetic things versus natural things. First of all, I offer to you as evidence. I don't mean to offend anyone. Maybe you like Spam. That's great. I'm happy for you. But Spam, that's not natural. There's a reason it's called, there's a play on words going there. Here's another example. Cheese is not meant to be in a can, right? Cheese is something that's sliced with a plane, not propelled with whatever that dioxide, whatever that gas is that spews it out. And tofurkey. I've not tried this, but again, it's just things that you hear about. These are not natural, and I want you to consider the alternatives. This is what God made, okay? If anything makes the point I'm trying to make, it's these illustrative pictures here. Synthetic versus natural. We think we're doing so well by tinkering on the things that God has given. And kind of a playful look at a bigger point I'm trying to make here. And let's consider some modern hewn stones for just a minute, okay? Modern hewn stones. I already made reference to the musician, but think about instrumental music in worship today. It is something that appeals to men. It's something just like carved stones that might draw people and get people in because they like that sort of thing. I like that sort of thing. It sounds good as far as the lust of the flesh is concerned. It feels good to the ear. But you know what? It's synthetic. It's created by men. It's hammered out by men, and it's formed by men. Whereas the singing that you see in the New Testament, they went out and they sung a hymn and went out, speaking to one another in psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs, offering the fruit of your lips, praise to God. All of the references to music in the New Testament, with the exception of figurative language taking place in heaven with harps and stuff, which we're told are references to the prayers of the saints. Every other reference to anything musical is singing in the New Testament. That's natural, right? It's God-given. Those are our voices producing sound which originates in the heart of God's people. So it's the choice between what is synthetic and what is natural. I want you to consider again Jeroboam and his priests from every class of people that he made in 1 Kings chapter 12. You think about a modern chiseled stone in religion today is that of inclusivity. Of wanting to provide an opportunity for whomever wants to do anything so that there is equality for all. And so there are no prohibitions then on who can preach, who can serve as an elder. And really the question is not ability or who could do a better job, but what God has said. In 1 Kings chapter 12, verse 31, he made priests from every class of people who were not of the sons of Levi. Everyone loved that for the most part, of course, except for Levi. Levi's out of a job, so they go and join themselves to Judah. But it might sound like a good idea. Let's be all inclusive. Let's make everything equal for everyone. The only problem is you've got the two choices between God's altar or whittling and hewing and chiseling away so that it becomes a creation of men. Think about, too, the role of entertainment in religion today. You know, we can chisel upon God's altar, if you will, by use of entertainment and the way that we would use entertainment to bring about what we believe is God's purpose in growing his kingdom. I have an example here for you from an example of these verses we've read and they're misordered. So this is an example of a ministry web page for a church I found online. Wouldn't argue with everything that the church is doing, but some things stand out to me as questionable when it comes to what the New Testament says and the lack of anything of the New Testament. I especially zero in on something referred to as a sports ministry. When I talk to you about I'm a cowboy and so I'm part of the cowboy church, this is what I'm talking about. I love sports and therefore I serve in our church's sports ministry. Well, what does that have to do with teaching the gospel? Well, you say, well, we can't get them in unless we provide something that'll draw them. Listen to the words of well-known preacher and Christian author Max Lucado, who said, "No longer can we afford the luxury of thinking that people who are sitting in our pews are going to be there every Sunday. We have to arrest their attention. We have to use every device possible to reach them and to teach them. And we need not be so apologetic about entertaining them. I mean, they've been entertained all week long, every time they turn around. I have no apology for putting a good singer in front of them to entertain them if they're not Christians. You've got to do something to reach them." That was in Preaching Magazine in 2005. He said that a long time ago. But he's not ashamed of entertaining because you've got to do something to reach them. That's what I'm asking about. Is there no end to what we'd be willing to do to reach people with the gospel? Ed Young, pastor of Fellowship Church in Texas, said in an interview, by the way, this church has 15,000 in a weekend service, said, "I want people at Fellowship Church saying, 'What is coming next?'" He's famous for keeping people guessing, doing everything from driving a Ferrari on stage to showing a video clip of him ordering a burger at McDonald's during his sermon. So what about that as an approach? Do we really want people coming because they're so intrigued by the speaker and what he may do next? As much as I'd like to wax up my motorcycle and feature it up here for some, illustration, or I'm just not sure that's appropriate. I imagine the elders agree with that. What about this phrase, we need to do something? You've got to do something to reach them. Where does the Bible say we should use every device possible? Paul did say in 1 Corinthians 9:22 that I became all things to all men. Is this what he had in mind? Why didn't Jesus become more to the men in John 6 when he allowed them to walk away? When he rebuked them for following him for the wrong reasons, because of the loaves and the fishes, because they ate of them and were filled. You think about how this doing whatever we can to reach them, every device possible. Think about how, if that's the way great men and women of old thought about fulfilling God's word, how things might have been different in Bible history. I may have used the illustration before about Noah in a Bible authority class that we had. Maybe not here. I don't know. But with the ark, if the objective was simply to get some bodies in the seats in the ark, then, well, think about all of the means by which he could have done that. If it's not really about just finding people who find grace and favor in the eyes of the Lord because they believe in him, but just to get people in, but think of all the animals he had at his disposal. Are we thinking the same thing here, the petting zoo or a circus? I mean, I can see that kind of thing today. You hear about that sort of thing in churches today, putting on and hosting those kinds of activities. Lot could have certainly emptied the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah just in time. Why didn't he just advertise a chariot race in the neighboring city? He could put something on here. And of course, if only Israel had understood what we now know about giving people what they want in worship. Think about how the priests could have modified their worship to make it more exciting with the altars and the sacrifices and everything. What if every 100th sacrificer won a prize at the altar? Well, why not mix together a little, unauthorized incense? What is the word, King James? Strange? Why not mix a little strange incense together that makes the fire or the smoke burn blue when you're the 100th offerer? Wouldn't that be cool? I've heard about that sort of thing, though. If you're riding the church bus, my mom tells a story about when she was young. She was so poor that her mom put her on the bus to go to church because they'd put money underneath the seats of one of the bus. We don't reward carnally people for wanting to serve the Lord. That's not the draw. That's not the appeal. And think about, in just the same way that we might take up, or they might have taken up a chisel to God's altar, and thereby causing God to lose glory. Are we not stealing from God's glory when we try to carnally incentivize people to be interested in his message? Well, is it not enough that he offers a way to be victorious over death? That he gives us a means by which we can be raised in the end and be reunited with people whom we love in the Lord, to be forgiven of our sins. These are hooks. This is bait that you would think would be enough. And so whatever effort we make to improve upon God's plan is going to end up stealing glory from him and causing it to not be as great as we think it's going to be. I want to close with a passage from Ezekiel 43, because this is a scripture that I think explains to us what kind of a reaction should there be when we read God's pattern and then we compare it to all of the man-made religion in the image of man sort of things that have been created today. You might think, wow, I can get that from Ezekiel. Well, yeah, you can in chapter 43 when you think about the shadow that the temple of God was to God's people today. Listen to what Ezekiel says in verses 10 through 12. What kind of reaction should there be when we consider the pattern versus what men have created? He says, "Son of man, describe the temple to the house of Israel, that they may be ashamed of their iniquities, and let them measure the pattern. And if they are ashamed of all that they have done, make known to them the design of the temple and its arrangement, its exits and entrances, its entire design, and all its ordinances, all its forms, and all its laws. Write it down in their sight, so that they may keep its whole design and all its ordinances and perform them. This is the law of the temple." Show them the design. Show them what it's supposed to look like. And what's it supposed to do? What's it going to accomplish? If they are ashamed of all that they have done. And would to God that it would be enough to show people simple New Testament Christianity. And that they would have, wow, it's really come a long way. Look at all the additions that have taken place. Let's get back to keeping the whole design and its ordinances and simply perform them. Recognize that God is in heaven and his will is the highest and most noble that is available. Appreciate your attention this morning very much. We want to grab a songbook and be prepared to sing our song of encouragement this time. Come, sinner, come. It's an invitation that traditionally comes at this time, but is available as often as God grants us breath. We don't know how long that will be, but God has been patient and forbearing with us. If there are those who are overtaken in sin and they need to be forgiven, God offers very graciously, freely for you to come, confessing your faith in Jesus, turning from sin and being baptized for the forgiveness of sins. If you've already become a Christian and you need prayers of your brothers and sisters here, please come forward now too while we stand and sing.